Good morning, bonjour à tous. Je suis Charlie Angus, député fédéral de Simmons Bay James. I'm here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. Je suis ici ce matin avec une alliance féministe internationale qui demande au gouvernement du Canada de prendre au sérieux les allégations contre Pornhub et MindGeek. Il dénonce le gouvernement libéral et le GRC pour le refus d'appliquer les lois canadiennes pour mettre fin à la diffusion de vidéos d'agression et de violences sexuelles. L'échec du gouvernement libéral à appliquer nos lois nationales a mis les femmes du monde entier en risque. Good morning. I'm here with a group, an alliance of international feminists who've been following the Pornhub study of the Privacy and Ethics Committee very closely. We have had over 600 women's organizations and survivors reach out to us. I will say just quickly that the Pornhub study by the Ethics Committee is now complete and will be reported to Parliament this week. And I'm very pleased that many of the recommendations by the New Democratic Party were accepted. What we learned in the study of Pornhub was very shocking. The proliferation of aggressive sexual assault, non-consensual videos assaulting women and children really raises serious questions. But what for us, I think was more shocking has been the failure of the Canadian government and the RCMP to apply the Canadian laws that exist to hold tech giants like Pornhub to account. And what we're seeing today from the presentation of international feminists is that what we've seen in Canada is the tip of the iceberg. We're at the nexus of a very dangerous new frontier in sexual violence and exploitation against women because of the power of the tech giants and the necessity for Canada to apply the laws that we have to ensure that women domestically and around the world are not put at risk. So I'm going to turn it over to women who've had the experience on the ground. And I also want to say that a number of the women who have played a key role in organizing this press conference cannot speak publicly because of the threats that they face in their own jurisdictions from paramilitaries and gangs who are involved in the violent exploitation of women. So these women bring the experience of women around the world who are calling on Canada to act.
Thank you, Charlie. I will now pass it over to Vaishnavi Sundar. She's a feminist activist from India.
Thank you. As of 2021, India's urban/rural population ratio is 35 to 65. Many women in villages live in acute poverty, depravity, and illiteracy. There are cases of young women being lured by men with the promise of marriage and better life to meet them outside their homes and have sex. Unbeknownst to the women, the entire act is recorded and distributed as clips on WhatsApp and eventually uploaded on porn websites. When women don't oblige, the jilted lovers gather more men and gang rape the women, holding a knife to her throat and filming the entire act. There was a case of a 17-year-old girl who was raped for an entire year because her rapist threatened to leak the said video if she didn't oblige. She was innocent in believing that the video would remain private as long as she kept having intercourse with them. Her rapist was selling her clips for 50 rupees, less than $1. If the rapes are violent, those videos get sold for a lot higher. These women spend their whole life not knowing that compromised videos of them are being watched by people on the internet. Such videos come under the category of homemade or hidden, among others, in websites like Pornhub. Although unconstitutional, India still practices the caste system, a stratified social hierarchy that deems people from a caste termed Dalits to be untouchable. Women belonging to the said caste face extreme violence in the hands of men, especially in the form of rape. In the past year, India reported an average of 10 Dalit women were raped per day. On January 2018, Asifa, an 8-year-old girl from Kathua, a Muslim nomadic tribe, was brutally gang raped, murdered, and discarded. When the news and identity of the victim was released, Asifa rape and Kathua rape video became the most searched phrases on porn websites. The Pornhub 2019 year-end review says, begin quote, "It seems that people are looking for more realistic depictions of sex. Real people versus actors seem to be the draw. Sex has become so much less taboo that those who get a kick out of exhibitionism can do so with very little experience or equipment. End quote. The truth is, many of these real women and girls have been put out there by others who abuse them. Canada is among the top 5 Pornhub consumers, and it hosts MindGeek, a corporation that welcomes men's demand for filmed human rights violation. Pornhub's message is that abductions, rapes, torture of vulnerable women, especially in the global south countries, can be considered fun sex experience for men everywhere. But this is no longer a Canadian issue. This is a global issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now pass it over to Alyssa Arabar. She's a legal expert, spokeswoman for Oser la Féministe in France.
Merci. Les mouvements féministes se mobilisent partout pour que les survivantes des violences liées au système pornographique soient entendues. En France, en 2020, une enquête a été ouverte pour viol et proxénétisme contre la plateforme pornographique Jackie et Michel. Et nous, à Oser le féminisme, nous accompagnons une centaine de victimes de cette plateforme. 75 à 80% ont subi des violences sexuelles dans l'enfance et une grande partie sont d'origine migrante. Les vidéos de leurs viols sont associées à des mises en scène racistes. Les utilisateurs des plateformes pornographiques recherchent principalement des termes dégradants, discriminatoires, lesbophobes et racistes, ce qui renforce les systèmes d'oppression dans les sociétés. Les femmes victimes de l'industrie pornographique sont contraintes de subir des sodomies, double pénétration, viols collectifs, coups, gifles, suffocation, jets d'urine, éjaculation faciale en groupe et d'autres violences qui leur gardent de graves séquelles physiques et psychotraumatiques. Les témoignages que nous avons recueillis en France font écho, évidemment, aux violences subies par les femmes dans le monde entier. Donc, certains pays comme le Venezuela, la Roumanie, le Nigeria ou la Colombie sont des cibles privilégiées du trafic humain à des fins d'exploitation sexuelle. Les vidéos des viols collectifs sur les sites pornographiques sont monnaie courante. Plus ces viols sont violents, plus ils se vendent cher. La plupart des victimes n'ont pas les moyens de les faire retirer. Il existe une épidémie des violences sexuelles à travers le monde et la pornographie est l'école et la légitimation de ces violences. Donc, le Canada a une responsabilité dans sa diffusion puisqu'il abrite MindGeek sur son territoire, une entreprise criminelle qui est propriétaire des plus grands sites pornographiques gratuits au monde. Le Canada est membre du G7, il est censé être un modèle pour la protection des filles et des femmes et il finance d'importants projets pour la lutte contre le trafic humain à l'étranger. Pourtant, ces règles ne sont pas appliquées dans les propres frontières du Canada. Vous faites partie du top 5 des pays avec le plus de trafic sur les sites pornographiques. Vous favorisez la demande pour la traite des filles et des femmes en permettant à MindGeek de normaliser les violences sexistes et sexuelles et cette incohérence doit cesser. Vous avez ratifié des conventions clés des Nations Unies pour la défense des droits des femmes, la protection des enfants, la lutte contre le trafic humain, la lutte contre la torture. Vous avez adopté le modèle nordique qui permet de lutter contre l'exploitation sexuelle et ces systèmes progressistes doivent être défendus contre les puissants lobbies proxénètes. La société civile, comme les gouvernements, doivent se mobiliser pour que les profits économiques de certains ne se fassent pas en sacrifiant les filles et les femmes les plus précarisées au monde. Les États-Unis, pays voisins, ont adopté en 2018 la loi Sesta-Fosta qui rend les plateformes en ligne responsables en cas de diffusion de vidéos liées au trafic humain. C'est possible de faire la même chose. Le monde vous regarde. Vous avez des responsabilités vis-à-vis du droit international, vis-à-vis de vos propres lois, ainsi que de l'ensemble des filles et des femmes qui sont condamnées au silence et à la peur. Vous avez la responsabilité d'appliquer des standards de protection exigeants. L'incapacité à agir du gouvernement canadien pour prévenir, stopper et réparer les crimes commis par MindGeek représente une grave violation des droits humains protégés internationalement. Il est temps que ça cesse. Merci.
Merci, Alyssa. Okay, the next person to speak will be Rita Maria Hernandez, who is an advocate who has worked for over a decade on frontline services offered to trafficked and prostituted women and girls, especially on the border between Mexico and the US. She's joining from Mexico.
Good morning. Kenny Mireya Finol was a 26-year-old Venezuelan woman who tried to escape the economic and political turmoil in her home country. An organized crime group in Mexico murdered and mutilated her. I'm speaking on behalf of Kenny and 16 other women who have been disappeared and are still missing and who are probably connected to the same organized crime group that murdered Kenny, filmed their assaults and torture, and then killed them and sold the videos to porn sites like Pornhub. The criminal organized group who ran the escort website Zona Divas procured their victims from Venezuela and Colombia to bring them into Mexico under the radar of Mexico's migration authorities, who then failed to record their existence in Mexico. After being transported to Mexico, the women's passports, legal documents were confiscated, and they lived under debt bondage. They were coerced as part of their trafficking debt repayment to permit themselves to be photographed by a pimp pornographer who is now in jail for trafficking in persons. Survivors testified that they resisted, cried, and begged not to be sexually humiliated and filmed. They were drugged and coerced into smiling for the camera. The women's human rights were violated in the production of the gang's videos that were sold and uploaded to websites like Pornhub. The gang threatened to send videos to the women's children, and they threatened to kill the women's relatives. In order to force the women's compliance, the mafia criminals lied to the women, promised them legal documents, and forced them to sign fake agreements with websites like Pornhub. These contracts are no more valid than confessions signed by prisoners of war. They are coerced by torture. Consent is now being discussed by the Canadian Parliament. Not only were these women's consents invalid because the women were tortured in order to obtain the consent, but when the crime of trafficking occurs, international law signed by Canada states that consent on behalf of the victim is irrelevant. The conduct that is under prosecution is that of the trafficker who abuses his position of power to exploit victims and gain profit. Canada must presume trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation when videos of unidentified women, unidentified uploaders of rapes and murders, and the context of these filmed human rights violations has occurred in unknown circumstances.
Oh, Rita, I don't think we can hear you now. Bit of a connection issue. Oh, I think we might have lost her. Let's give Rita a second and see if she can rejoin us.
Over every day on Pornhub. Canada has a responsibility to make MindGeek and Pornhub stop facilitating and profiting from this type of exploitation. They owe the victims a debt of apology and repair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita. And we'll now be moving on to Nuria Nova, who is a journalist, data analyst, and activist at feminicido.net. She's joining us from Spain.
Thank you. In 2016, 5 men who called themselves La Manada, or the Wolf Pack, raped a young woman in Spain. One of them was a civil guard and another one was in the military. As often happens, the woman was further victimized by being blamed for her own gang rape. The brutal case mobilized the Spanish feminist movement, but the filmed rape trended on Pornhub, Xvideos, Xhamster, and was the most searched for term on the web the weeks after the men were sentenced. In the 4 years prior to August 2020, we documented 211 gang rapes in Spain. One of them resulted in femicide, and 1 in 10 of these rapes are transformed into porn. They were photographed or filmed by the rapists. There is a horrible sameness between gang perpetrator sexual violence and these super popular videos, which are categorized as gangbang. In pornography, the male is the subject who has a sexual desire, and women and girls are the dehumanized, humiliated object. The most popular porn today sends the message that their objection, their resistance, and their no must not be respected. Men are taught by pornography like Pornhub that women's physical pain is sexually arousing. All kinds of violent and humiliating videos sold by Pornhub are promoted as sexually arousing for men. Men who engage in collective sexual violence are imitating pornography, which is a school of sexual violence that has established a global rape culture. In addition to these crimes, the women's videos are viewed, shared, and reproduced on Pornhub and other platforms with new titles. This reproduction of their abuse, humiliation, and rape is ongoing torture for any woman who is alive after these human rights violations. These gang rapes in Spain, Italy, India, and elsewhere are not isolated incidents. They are the result of pornography's normalization of systematic violence. We need to apply human rights framework to the criminals who control and profit from the filmed gang rapes produced by porn pimps. Canada bears responsibility for its role in protecting the distribution of criminally produced pornography, and Canada should fund educational campaigns against objectification of women, against hypersexualization and stereotyped roles of women and girls, while at the same time promoting healthy relationships and sexuality based on equality, mutual desire, respect, and empathy. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move over to Osea Agatise, who's a jurist, women's rights activist, and United Nations expert on trafficking. She is from Nigeria.
Thank you. Young people in Nigeria now have relatively easy access to internet and smartphones, which also gives them easy access to pornography. The result of this is that the extremely few cases of rape in the past have now turned into an epidemic of sexual violence. This year, a 17-year-old boy raped a 5-year-old girl. Last year, 16 teen boys gang raped 8 girls who were younger than 12 years old. A group of high school students in Lagos gang raped their female classmates. In all of these cases, they were practicing what they learned in pornography, like that seen on Pornhub. I'm sure you know of similar cases in your countries. Today in Edo State in Nigeria, we're working to prosecute over 27 cases of rape, incest, and other sexual violence and sexual attacks on children. 27 is a frightening number, but it is the tip of the iceberg. COVID-19 has made women and girls particularly vulnerable because of their increased poverty. Online pimps and traffickers have used COVID to their advantage. There are very many Nigerian traffic victims in Italy and in other parts of Europe. Many of these women have been raped while under the control of pimps, and their rapes were filmed. Then these films are transmitted to porn sites like Pornhub and MindGeek via other social networks like WhatsApp. The women are usually not aware that they are being filmed. They cannot possibly consent to these films. Threats from traffickers that their filmed rapes will be shown to their family and friends keep them under the criminals' violent control. It also deepens their trauma and psychological stress. Many women have constant suicidal thoughts. This violently coerced production, distribution, and consumption of pornography are human rights violations. They are an abuse of power and of the vulnerability of women and girls from countries like Nigeria, where women and girls live under chronic socioeconomic injustice, armed conflicts, humanitarian emergencies, climate change crisis, among other causes. While MindGeek reaps billions of dollars in profits for Canada, women, boys, and especially girls are paying the cost with their lives. When girls become women, these human rights violations simply continue. When will these human rights violations stop? Canada must investigate MindGeek for gross human rights violations. If crimes are found to have occurred, MindGeek must set up a compensation for harms they have helped to perpetrate, including trauma-based rehabilitation and support of victims in Canada and in the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now pass it over to our final speaker this morning, who is Dr. Gail Dines, a professor emerita of sociology and women's studies.
Thank you. In the US, we have a saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, often meaning that if you buy sex from women in Vegas, law enforcement ignores the crimes and you are given a pass. Well, it's clear that what happens in Canada doesn't stay in Canada. Canada is home to MindGeek, a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise that trades in the bodies of women and children, an owner of the world's largest free porn sites, including, of course, Pornhub. You've just heard from women in excruciating detail the grave human rights violations, including rape, gang rape, torture, trafficking, sexualized murders, and others wrought by MindGeek in India, France, Mexico, Spain, and Nigeria. And to this, we can add multiple other countries from the global south, as well as the global north. While MindGeek argues that they monitor content, the reality is very different. The well-oiled PR machine of MindGeek, bolstered by the lobbying arm of the porn industry, ironically named the Free Speech Coalition, works overtime to conceal and legitimize the illegal activities of MindGeek that span the porn industry value chain from production through to distribution. We know from survivors that Pornhub uploads videos of children being raped, many of whom are trafficked. We also know that reaching the age of 18 does not prevent women from being trafficked and having their rapes uploaded onto Pornhub. MindGeek hides behind the concept of consent. But as we just heard, consent is a meaningless concept when you are poor, hungry, trafficked, displaced, raped, held prisoner, and live in fear of your life. The production end of the value chain relies on these grotesque forms of coercion, often invisible to those who are fortunate enough never to know what such coercion looks like. MindGeek distributes these illegal videos across the globe, making life intolerable for women and girls in the videos, and for women and girls and boys everywhere who somehow have to survive in a world drenched in violent porn. Allowing MindGeek to continue to profit from women and children's oppression is now not simply ignorance, but a willful refusal on the part of the Canadian government to hold MindGeek accountable for its criminal activities. The massive scale and systemic nature of the crimes against women and girls worldwide classifies as gross human rights violations under international human rights laws. The individual and collective harm, including physical and mental injury, the emotional suffering, and the planned and sustained acts of violence by the perpetrators must be addressed by the Canadian government to prevent further acts of violence and to provide remedies to the victims. Anything less is a violation of women and children's human rights. We appeal to you, the Canadian government, to act against MindGeek and enforce your existing laws so that this international criminal enterprise is put on notice that the world will no longer tolerate their flagrant human rights violations. You in Canada are in an enviable position of being a beacon to the rest of the world to say women and children's lives matter. All women and children's lives matter. And then we can applaud you by the fact that what happens in Canada doesn't stay in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all the speakers for taking part this morning. So we are now ready to take questions. Nous sommes maintenant prêts à répondre aux questions. As a reminder, to ask a question, please use the raised hand function or send me a message in the chat. You will get one question and one follow-up. Pour rappel, pour poser une question, veuillez utiliser la fonction lever la main ou m'envoyer un message. And if you could just, once I call on you to ask your question, if you could please state your name and your publication. The first question is going, and I don't see your full name, I'm sorry, but M. Marquis. Go ahead. M. Marquis, you can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, I'm going to come back to you because I can't hear you right now. Next, we're going to go to City News.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to hold this news conference today. I just wanted to ask Charlie Angus, what do you think the ideal outcome for this would be? Because it seems that for every Pornhub and MindGeek out there, there's dozens of other sites structured on a similar exploitative model. So I imagine that an ideal outcome here would be able to set a precedent or have a chilling effect on those corporations, those entities. So what would an ideal outcome look like here?
I think quite simply in Canada, we should apply the laws we already have on the books. We have some very robust legislation. We just don't seem to have any political willingness to use it. I was shocked to learn that the RCMP treats Pornhub MindGeek, they say, as a partner, a private sector partner to work with them on identifying pornography. Well, we don't do police partnerships with any other corporation. The job is to apply the law. If there's elements of non-consensual abusive videos, the laws exist. Apply those laws. But we see what the RCMP an unwillingness to step forward. The Liberal government has even refused to say whether they believe MindGeek is a Canadian company, even though they're headquartered in Montreal. We have laws. Apply the laws, and then I think that would send a clear message about how to start dealing with the larger international issues of non-consensual and abusive videos.
And as a follow-up, these companies, as you say, seem structured in a way as to avoid oversight by any one country. I mean, you mentioned yourself, Minister Lametti, making the argument that he's not sure if Canada would be able to enforce these laws. Are you considering some sort of international approach, a more coordinated approach that can try and pursue charges in other jurisdictions as well?
Well, obviously, we need an international approach to the international exploitation of vulnerable women and the exploitation of children. But I think Mr. Lametti just needs to read the law. He talks about they're not sure where Pornhub servers are. The law doesn't talk about servers. It talks about a service. If you're providing a service and you're breaking the law in terms of promoting abusive content in Canada, the law applies. It's the refusal of the government to accept that fact, I think, that has gotten us into trouble. And the biggest concern is the mandatory reporting requirements that were put in place in 2011, that if an internet service provider is made aware of allegations of child abusive content, they have to report it to the police. If Pornhub had followed the law from the beginning, we may not be in that situation today, but they were not following the mandatory reporting laws, and the RCMP seemed to be content to let them do this on a voluntary basis. The law, I read the law, it's mandatory. If there's an allegation of child abuse, that should have been reported. If it was reported going back to 2011 with these companies, maybe many of these horrific stories that we saw today would be avoided because we would have a much clearer pattern of where this content is.
Thank you. The next question is going to Pierre Beauregard. Go ahead, Pierre.
Yes, Mr. Angus, thank you for your role in Canada. I view you as the conscience of many people resonate, are very happy to hear you speak what they're thinking inside and is not being said by too many people. I'm horrified living in Montreal to know MindGeek is here. I want to know, you say the law as it is sufficient, but a bill is being proposed by Arnold Viersen, Bill C-302, to ask for verifications before anything is uploaded. Do you think that bill would help or not?
I think the issue of verification is very important, and I can't speak of what the recommendations are coming down in the new recommendations that our all-party committee agreed unanimously to send to Parliament. But there are many of these loopholes that need to be closed, and I'm hoping Parliament, when they see our recommendations, will be willing to actually act on it. And so, you know me, I'm always hopeful, and I'm hopeful the government will finally do the right thing, because we're talking about lives here. We're talking about people's lives who've been destroyed. And we promised the survivors when they spoke and came forward and were willing to come forward and show their bravery, for all the ones who couldn't come forward, that we would hear them and we would act. And I'm hoping the government will act.
Okay, we have a few more minutes for questions. Oh, I see we have a question here now from Elimine Malki from La Presse. Her question is for Mr. Angus. Can you give us an idea of what is in the report? And, oh, I didn't get the second part of your question. So let's start with the first half. And Melanie, if you could send me the second half, I will ask that.
All I can say, until a report has been delivered to Parliament, I can't reveal, but I would say that we worked across party lines. I think we have some very vigorous recommendations, but from what you see today, what we dealt with is just the tip of the iceberg. We did not have the time in this Parliament to address the international aspects of the crisis that has been revealed through the Pornhub study. So this is why today we wanted to have international voices speak and draw the much bigger pattern. Canada is not an island, and in the age of tech giants, the power of these tech giants to do good or to do extreme harm has become very clear. We need laws in place, I think, to protect people.
Okay, and Melanie's follow-up question is, Minister Guilbeault had promised to table a bill to ban heinous content and pedopornographic content and has still done nothing. What is your take on this?
God help the women of the world if they're relying on Minister Guilbeault to protect them. Where is his bill? He's done nothing. This government has done nothing. It's not acceptable to come now and tell us, oh, someday there will be a pornography regulator. We have laws. Apply the laws. Do the right thing. Don't give us this run around that down the road you're going to do something. Do it now. We have the laws, and this is why I'm very frustrated with the government's lack of action.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function, or you can send me a direct message in the chat. Okay, Sitting News, you can go ahead. I see your hand is raised.
Hi, so thanks again. If we've got a bit more time, I'd like to ask, is the NDP interested in pursuing further action related to pornography, as it seems clear from some of the remarks provided by the experts and scholars present today that the very nature of pornography as an industry is exploitative, predicated on the exploitation of women. So is the NDP interested in pursuing any further studies or further action on this?
I think for us, it was really important to look at Pornhub, and we looked at it from the frame of non-consensual abusive videos and the corporate failure to respect the rights of citizens. That's our focus. And I think that will remain our focus, the obligations of the tech giants to respect the privacy rights of citizens, and also to respect the laws that we have nationally. We have laws in place about non-consensual abusive content, and those laws aren't being applied. For us, that is what we're focused on.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go to the questions in the chat now. We have a few from people who are joining. So Jeanette Westbrook, and this might be more a question for some of the women who were speaking today to respond to. Jeanette Westbrook, who's a survivor of film, child rape, trafficking, and torture, asks, how can adult survivors like myself help hold these pornographers, buyers of nations that permit exploitation to continue? Survivors are ready to help. We can join class action lawsuits. I continue to suffer from my trafficking film exploitation.
Would one of the women participants be ready to answer?
That's me. That's me, yes. Many of us survivors are willing to come forward. We're willing to join class action suits. We're willing to file felony charges. We are willing to take action in holding accountability. But we think that Canada needs to join with other nations, like the United States, because while we take Pornhub down in one site, it just moves to another nation. So it's really going to have to take some global work, in my opinion. So my own exploitation, I can never be certain, because when I was a child, it was 8mm, but now they've transferred the 8mm over to the latest and greatest exploitive films and still disseminating. So it's the type of crime that you can never get away from. It haunts you for the rest of your life, and even after you're dead, it will still be viewed. So we have to take some action. And I heard someone say that survivors are destroyed. Well, some of us are put back together well enough to pursue this and help with this. And we can't make those assumptions that we're all destroyed because of our innumerable rapes and exploitation. So we do have to begin somewhere. Let's begin with Canada. Thank you.
May I respond to this for a second?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeanette, for your comments. Greatly appreciated. The thing about that separates MindGeek from any other porn company is it is basically the bones and the flesh of the porn industry. unlike any other company, it controls not only production, houses not only consumption, distribution, also webmasters. You are never in the porn industry more than 2 degrees of separation away from MindGeek. This is why they are the center of the criminal activity of the porn industry. So why we need to look at other companies, if we went after MindGeek to hold them responsible for the crimes that they are committing and that they are distributing, it would have a profound effect on the porn industry worldwide, because the infrastructure would be seriously compromised if we held MindGeek accountable. So it stands aside. It is the Amazon of the porn industry.
Thank you for that. Is that it for our questions?
We have a few more. So the next one is Genevieve Gluck. She's asked, this is directed towards Mr. Angus, what sort of preventive measures do you imagine ought to be put in place going forward? More and more tube sites are appearing, and there's also homemade pornography posted to social media and forums such as Reddit. Is it possible to create legislation around this developing phenomenon?
Well, thank you. I have to say, this has been quite the fall down a very dark rabbit hole for everyone on our committee. We had no background in this, but we approached it from what we saw from the New York Times. We saw it from some of the very brave survivors who came forward, and as Ms. Westbrook said, survivors who put themselves back together. I think the first step for us in Canada is the parliamentary report. And I'm sorry I can't reveal the recommendations yet, but by the end of the week, it will be in Parliament, and we will be able to discuss the many recommendations we are putting together. This is because of the age of tech and the tech giants, there are a lot of complex issues, but a number of these issues are also simple. It is a willingness to apply the law. It is a willingness to say that survivors should be believed. And it's a willingness to hold very powerful men to account when they break the law. And we haven't seen that yet. But if we see that, I think it will send a very clear message that things are going to be different and things need to be different. So I'm hoping that our report will be a stepping stone on a path to a more just and holding the tech giants, and some of them are very powerful corporations and some of them are very seedy operations. But at the end of the day, the laws have to apply.
Okay, and we have time for one final question. So it's from Andrea Nobre. Is there any specific legislation in place or in the making to tackle trafficking of women and girls from the global south into Canada?
And she's coming to us from Brazil. So I will turn it over to our women experts who have been on the front lines a lot longer than I have. Maybe one can answer that question. Maybe Madame Hernandez.
Oh, but they're asking about services in Canada, right? For women that are coming in from other countries. Am I understanding the question?
Any specific legislation to tackle trafficking of women? And oh, I see. Yes, you are so correct. You are so correct. And it is about tackling the trafficking of women and girls from the global south into Canada.
I wouldn't
sorry.
know.
You are so good at this. I'm learning my craft on this file. But there is an all parliamentary committee on human trafficking. This issue has been gaining a lot more, and we have to also acknowledge in Canada the femicide that has been committed against Indigenous women and girls. We have something in Canada called the Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears are the murdered Indigenous women and girls from one end of the country to the other, and making those connections with sexual violence and abuse is something that we need to do in Canada. So I'm hoping that this is an issue we are going to be taking more seriously in Parliament and in the various provincial legislatures that I know this issue is coming up again and again.
What's also interesting to highlight is how Canada has ratified a lot of international UN conventions on different subjects, so equality between women and men, protection of children, fight against torture, fight against trafficking, and all of these commitments needs to be applied as well.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. So the final question, I think City News might have a follow-up. I'll give you the final question if you have one. Or maybe you just forgot to take your hand down. It's possible.
Can I say something?
Certainly.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes, go ahead. We'll give you the final question and then we're gonna put this to a close. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Jean Sarson and I live in Nova Scotia, Canada. And along with Linda McDonald and other Canadians, we have supported the women who are speaking today. And when we talk about Canada, I have to say I'm very disappointed in Canada and have been for a long time. The women today are talking about the torture that women and girls suffer. And if we are to respect women's voices, we are to hear what they're saying. And in 2012, Linda McDonald and I went to the UN Committee Against Torture in Geneva and complained that Canada does not acknowledge torture perpetrated by private individuals, which is the buyers of Pornhub videos, torture videos, etc. Canada at that time decided that even though the Committee Against Torture recommended that our national law should do something about torture by private individuals or non-state actors, Canada decided, the government of the time decided that that was a soft law recommendation and they didn't have to pay any attention to it. So we're at this stage now, these many years later, doing the same talk around the torture of women and children by Pornhub, where people are making billions of dollars. So I want to thank NDP, and I want to thank you, Charlie, for at least hearing all of the women and the women in Canada that Lynn and I have spoken of who have been tortured for years and decades. So our message is not only a global one, but it's so-called a Canadian one. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. All right, so that concludes today's press conference. Thank you to everyone for joining and taking part. Ceci met à la fin la conférence de presse. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Thank you so much.